Welcome to the 27th episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest was born in Singapore and raised in Malaysia. She graduated from the American School in Japan in 2006. She obtained her BA from Southern Methodist University and her MED from Vanderbilt University in 2014. After 10 international moves in 30 years, she has spent the past 3 years working in sports event management and marketing. Actively involved in the world of triathlon and the local swim, bike, run communities, she is an age group amateur triathlete based in Tokyo. She is part of the Ironman's Foundation of Women for Tri Ambassadors team, supporting female participation initiatives and engaging female athletes across all race distances and athletic abilities. Despite being an indoor training enthusiast, you can usually find her working or competing at a race on the weekends or on Instagram at My Little Suzuki. Welcome to the podcast, Faith.
Thank you for having me, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. And we've actually, this morning, I've been having major internet issues. So what we're going to do today is just these first 3-4 minutes. We're going to get our faces on the, on this recording, and then we're going to go full audio. So for now, we'll keep the video, and then we'll go full audio. It's just that we can sort of maintain a more reasonable level of audio quality. Today we're going to talk a bit about triathlons, Ironman, all the stuff that I know very little about, but you know a lot about. So that'll make an interesting conversation. So let's just start off with the gist of this. What is a triathlon and what is Ironman?
Sure. So triathlon itself is actually a swim, a bike, and a run. Some people might know what an aquathon or duathlon is. It's kind of in that same group. It's what we call multi-sport. And so it's combining various sports together into one race. And so that means maybe it's a bike and run or swim and run or swim and bike. And so there's various kind of levels to multi-sport, but probably amongst the most popular of them would be triathlon. Within triathlon, Ironman is perhaps the most well-known brand. And so what that means is that Ironman is, again, a corporation that holds various Ironman triathlon races around the world. I think currently, they have something like 200 races around like 40 countries or 50 countries. In Japan, we have what we call Ironman 70.3, which is when you have the 70 point, it means 70.3 miles, and that actually is a half Ironman. 140.6 miles is your full Ironman. It's what most people would consider to be the peak of triathlon, the full Ironman. And so for triathlon, the distances come in a lot of different distances. The general kind of 4 tiers that you have are sprint triathlons, which are great for beginners. The distances aren't too crazy. It would usually be about a 750 meter swim, followed by a 20K bike, followed by a 5K run. So, those distances don't make your eyes pop. You'll probably be done with it in under 2 hours or something like that. And so it's a manageable goal for people who are kind of, dipping their toes into the triathlon world. And then after that, you have the Olympic distance triathlon, which is actually what you would see on the Olympics. The reason being that if you put a full Ironman distance triathlon, which even for the pros, it takes about 8 to 9 hours, it's just too dang long to be watching in the Olympics. And so the Olympic distance makes it kind of a little bit longer than your sprint triathlon, but it's still exciting. The pros will be done in under 2 hours. And so that is, the Olympic distance is 1.5 kilometers of a swim, followed by a 40K bike, and then a 10K run.
As I mentioned at the very start, in order to sort of maintain a higher audio quality, we're going to move on to going all audio from here. So we'll go ahead and both turn off our videos.
All right.
We're now in audio. I'm honestly not sure. Like, it might just even be in my head that it's better, but I would imagine there's some science behind it.
Better, right?
You know, we've been talking about triathlons, Ironman. These concepts, these races seem very new to me. Growing up, you know, we hear a lot about marathons. I was just Googling last night, you know, how many people run marathons. And, you know, we're talking about millions. So what is a demographic like in regards to those who do sort of the lightest, you know, the easiest level of triathlons? And, you know, what are their backgrounds like? Because we know virtually anyone can do a marathon. I mean, even though it's a pretty long distance. So is there sort of like a limit in regards to, you know, what type of people can actually be involved in triathlons?
So that's a great question. So somewhat loaded, if you will, because I think the answer might actually surprise you. But I'll try to unpack it from what I know. Like you mentioned, marathon, you know, tends to be you need a pair of shoes, you know, some shorts, a bottle, and you're out the door. You need to put in the hours, hopefully, if you don't want to injure yourself. And so that's all peachy. In triathlon, it does require more. And so to that end, I think triathlon's actually kind of acquired a little bit of a reputation, and not necessarily a positive one, that it's a sport for people who are of means, who are well off. And part of that is certainly fueled by, for example, I think a couple of years ago, the New York Times took hold of some data from the USA Triathlon organization about the average median or the median income of triathletes registered with USAT. And USAT is basically, you need to be registered before every race for insurance purposes, like liability for race organizers. So it's not, you know, an organization that only the elite register for. It's every triathlete who wants to compete in any level race. And I think the median income was something like $126,000. And then there were other statistics from Ironman where, especially in the longer distance races, that the average income was something like $247,000, which is just wild. And, you know, I don't want you to think that that's what I'm earning at all. But because there are so many aspects of triathlon that do require gear, we are ultimately doing three sports. And so the bike especially can be several $1,000s, if not tens of thousands. And I can comfortably say that the two bikes I have at home are the most expensive items in my home. And it can be an expensive sport. And if you have the means to, then, you know, by all means, knock yourself out and buy the nicest bells and whistles and all shiny things. But because of that reputation, I think some people also, you know, kind of get a little bit wary of what triathlon is about. And so that is probably one of the most negative reputations that triathlon might have, that it's a sport for the wealthy. The sport of triathlon is also largely men in the 40s or 50s. Again, that kind of skews the average income part. It is not a lot of women, for sure. In Asia, I think sometimes at some of the races I'm at, maybe 10 to 15% of the participants, that could mean about like 20 to 40 are women, and the rest are men, you know, like 400 guys and just like 40 ladies, which makes it a little easier, if you will, for us to make the podium. But it does kind of feel like a lonely sport because there are just so few women. And amongst women, again, women who have children, who have already had children and who whose children are, kind of independent, at least in their teens or so. A lot of women in their 40s tend to come out, and lo and behold, they're actually some of the most powerful women out on the field. And it's not necessarily because they're just good at one thing. It's when you combine all three sports, they happen to be, a little bit above average in two or three. And so that is actually more important than really being good at this one sport. And so you do have a lot of women who are mothers, who are in their 40s or 50s, who are just killing it, and literally just, crushing the competition of younger women like myself. I'm 31, and I routinely have slower times than ladies in their 40s. And so I think that's a really cool part about triathlon, is that, age is not really a factor, especially for women. I do have to say that for men, you're probably peaking at by around like 38, your late 30s, you've probably hit your peak. Not to say that, men in their 40s are not crushing it.
So sort of unpacking some of the parts you mentioned about the demographics of triathlon, you mentioned there was a lot of people in their 40s and 50s, yet the peak tends to be late 30s. Why do you think it attracts people so much more in their 40s, 50s in comparison to, where most people sort of peak in their athletics in their 20s and 30s?
That's a really great question. And I think I don't know what it is about triathlon that makes it so specifically attractive. I know triathlon, for a lot of people, triathlon is something that they pursue after running or cycling. It just, when you are doing three sports, it is a little bit, and I know it sounds ironic, but it is a little bit more gentle on your body because you're not pounding the pavement, or you're not, shredding your shoulders, or really putting that burden on your legs that cycling might do. So you're kind of more evenly balancing out the burden on your body. And there is definitely a strong sense of community amongst triathletes, especially if you are associated or if you're part of a club or a team. Yeah, I think it's a lot of sense of community, but also being able to have this goal of, of an A race or a B race.
Interesting. And you're firsthand very involved with triathlons. About how many do you participate in each year?
I would say probably it's a little bit seasonal. I do tend to hate the cold, and so I think that's once it's winter, pretty much all races for me are out the door. I will participate in some running races, road races. It's good for me to kind of keep that training up and being able to, put it to a test. But triathlon generally is also very seasonal. There is, basically when it's warm, you're out there racing. I usually, in an ideal world, I would usually participate in about 2 70.3s a year. This year I've been doing triathlon for 4 years, and I've done 4 70.3s. You do pay a pretty penny, usually signing up for one 70.3 race, a race that maybe lasts about 1.5 hours. It usually costs about $400 just to participate. And then you gotta add, flights or hotels, everything else. And so it's not, it's certainly not the cheapest thing compared to, maybe signing up for a marathon or a half marathon.
Why do you think, what makes the cost like $400 or $500? What part about organizing the event elevates the cost so much?
Oh, yeah. So that's a great question. And that's actually part of what I do for work, kind of race management. And it's a lot of factors. And I hope, if anything, this is probably the most important part of what I would might touch upon today is that there are a lot of factors that go into arranging and organizing a race of this caliber, not just limited to getting permits, having security, closing down the roads, having, all the little knickknacks and the swag bags. You also have to pay for staff, for all the rooms and the ballrooms that you have to have for the expo. You have to pay for bike mechanics. You have to pay for just so many different things. And it is an experience. It's not your local hometown 5K. There is, an MC. There is a nice big finish line with lots of music and food vendors for after the race. There's usually a massage tent, an ice pool. And so there's a lot of bells and whistles that go with the Ironman brand. And, some people might say that they don't need that sort of experience. But when you show up to an Ironman race, there, and I sound like I'm just, touting for Ironman here. I'm not directly involved with them, but, we show up for a race Thursday or Friday for a race that is on Saturday. There's brief you have to attend to make sure that we all know the race course and we know what the safety situation is, where, how the swim course looks like, where we're coming out, what the transition area looks like, if we have special needs bags, what the aid stations will be like. Also tourism money that goes into hosting for a lot of these cities. And so it's not just a one-way deal, if you will. The last race I went to in Bangsan in Thailand, most of us stay there for, up to a week. I stay there, I think, for about 5 or 6 days. And so, that's a lot of money we're spending on the hotel, on food, and just, kind of enjoying what the city has to offer. So it is usually a boon for the hosting city as well.
That's fascinating. That it's sort of this like almost like a triathlon Ironman tourism. I see that on my island a lot, where people come from around the world for our various marathons, and I think we host an Ironman too. People come and actually they'll stay, right? They don't just come, run, and then leave. Because I guess maybe that makes the trip not worth the entire, not worthwhile. But if you can incorporate trips into it, as you said, it's a great tourism boost. So, it's a win-win.
Yeah, you totally nailed it. And it's funny you mentioned, because I actually went to Ironman 70.3 Jeju, which took place in July 2018. And we rented a car. We stayed in 2 different hotels. We ate all kinds of food. We went to all the tourist sites with like the little crater. And so we spent about a week there just enjoying what Jeju had to offer. And that race, unfortunately, because of weather conditions, the swim was shortened down significantly. I was cycling in the rain, and the run was also pretty miserable. But it was a great event, and unfortunately the turnout wasn't so great, and so they didn't have a second year for that. But and it doesn't always work out, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue into the question of, so I mean, it seems like there's a few barriers, right? Well, one is it takes a lot of training, and we'll get into that later. But there's a lot of time to train. You have to travel, unless you want to just exclusively, right, race in your city alone, which I think most people don't want to do that, right? People want to travel. So how do you manage to triathlon athlete yet maintain a full-time job?
That is a great question. And I think a lot of triathletes tend to be very, some people might say type A. We tend to maybe be perfectionists. We are creatures of routine. And so a lot of times we have to be, because, like anyone else, we have our different responsibilities. So for me personally, I I'm a creature of routine, of habit. I tend to come to work really early. I'm lucky to where I can more or less set my own schedule. But I tend to be at the office by 7 so that I can leave the office by around 3 or 4, which gives me the rest of the evening or the late afternoon to pursue whatever training I may want or need to do. I do have a coach, and so that's also another expense that some people don't anticipate. And it's not that everyone needs a coach, but for me, it's helpful to have the workout set. You need to have a schedule and the time to set aside. And for some people, it means waking up at 4 a.m. In fact, I know of a teacher at ASIJ who is also a triathlete, and she wakes up at 3 a.m.
Wow.
To do her workouts before school. And she was like, yeah, I'm in bed by around 8. And her husband, I won't mention any names, her husband is pretty much the polar opposite. And the reason I actually found them was through my work. I noticed that, this was a name that I was very familiar with from my days of high school at ASIJ. We wound up at a race together because I tend to work the races. And I was like, hey, how are you guys doing? And, it'd been about 15 years since I last saw this teacher. And he was now married, and his wife is a triathlete, and we've actually gotten to know each other very well. And so that was just, it was wild how things kind of come full circle, if you will. But going back to how people manage their time, it's difficult to pinpoint, how people work out or train. For me, I hate morning workouts. I mean, absolutely despise working out in the morning. But, for other people, like this ASIJ teacher, she wakes up at 3, goes to bed at 8. Like that's her routine. But generally, I think we do a good job of finding that sort of routine. I can't speak for mothers. I'm not actually too familiar with how they manage their time, but I think, there's also a lot of communication that goes on with their spouse and their family about how to manage each other's time so that everyone gets to do, what they want to do. A lot of our time spent training is also on the weekends with longer rides. So usually for me on the weekdays, I spend maybe 60 to 90 minutes every weekday, which is, I think, at least to me, I don't think is a huge commitment. You just go for an hour, 90 minutes. But on the weekends is where, you're really putting in the hours, whether you're cycling for 3 hours and then running for an hour, or just cycling, doing a long ride for 5 or 6 hours. That's where we tend to kind of log our hours and deposit the hours in the bank.
Interesting. So it seems like certain occupations would be more conducive towards one who does a triathlon. And as you mentioned, like teaching, for example, I mean, there's rarely overtime. You have the weekends. Whereas it seems like if you had a job, say like at if you're a corporate lawyer and you might get called in on a Saturday or Sunday, it would be very difficult because you'd have to break out of that routine.
Yeah, and it's funny because quite frankly, I don't know such high flyers, but those are actually the kinds of men that you often see in the triathlon world. We have a saying, and this might apply a little bit more to cyclists, but MAMILs, which is kind of a take on mammals, and it stands for middle-aged men in Lycra. So, we tend to wear a lot of very tight, snug, spandex sort of Lycra outfits when we're cycling. And on the weekends, especially, you'll see a lot of these middle-aged men on their very expensive bikes, with their mates, their their buddies just doing whatever ride. And a lot of them, do tend to at least try a try. But yeah, I don't, I can't speak for them. I don't know how they find their time, but I do think a lot of them tend to have early mornings to do a quick workout before the start of their day. I think a lot of them tend to do it in the morning, which is, again, clear opposite from me, but I don't work their schedule.
That's intriguing. So you think that the morning is what basically makes a difference between someone who has what it takes to train for a triathlon versus although you said you don't train in the morning, right? But you're saying a lot of people you do know seem to just wake up very early, just basically get that training in before the day starts.
I think you've also read those articles on various internet sources about how the key to success is rising and shining, basically. I'm going to push back on that. But I do think a lot of executives, C-suite guys will wake up early just to get that morning swim, get that morning started right and fired up early.
So there's three components, right? There's swimming, there's the biking, and there's the running. And I feel like the swimming and the running, we've all been involved with. When it comes to the biking, you've mentioned it in the beginning, how it's quite expensive, or it can be expensive. Do you think that with the bikes, is there a certain level of quality of bikes that people have to own in order to compete at at least the lowest level?
I love that you're asking that question, because I think for a lot of people, the cycling is one of the biggest barriers and what makes beginners a little bit self-conscious, if you will. There is a saying in triathlon and in cycling that it's about the engine, which is to say that it's about you, right? You are the engine powering your bike. And, to some extent that is true. Of course, if you're, at a triathlon with a mountain bike, it's probably not going to bode well for you unless it is it's a race that requires mountain bikes. And there are races called Xterra, which are triathlons on in the trails, off-road. But with Ironman, they're all on the road. The bike it can be a very expensive component. With the swim, it's, get a swim cap or some swim trunks, a swimsuit, basically, goggles. That's pretty much all there is, and hope you don't drown. But then there's also the run. Well, the run is a run. Most everybody can survive on a run as well. The cycling, because there is the aspect of climbs or speed, it's for example, most people want to average 30K per hour on their bike splits. And so that's, it's relatively fast, and some people don't like that kind of speed. But it's also difficult to gain that kind of speed if you're on a clunker from Walmart, for example. And you also want comfort. If you're riding 180 kilometers, most of us are going to be out on the road for about 6 hours, if not more. You want to be comfortable on your bike. And so with the short distance races, if you're only on your bike for 20K, probably not going to be on your bike for more than an hour, which is fine. And that's why it's also encouraged for beginners. The hurdle is a little lower, but when you're on the bike for so long, 3 hours and up, you do want to look into a bike that is lighter, maybe of a frame that's carbon, and more comfortable. And there are two different types of bikes generally that people are looking at. There's a road bike, which have your kind of curved drop handles, and they have multiple gears. Usually they have 22 gears or more. And these are generally what people start out with. They are all around great for going up hills, for hill climbing, for flat roads, flat surfaces. And you also have, when you are a little bit more dedicated to the sport, perhaps, a lot of people start to consider getting what we call a TT, a time trial, or a triathlon bike, a tri-bike. And these are much more aggressive in design. The geometry is set up for you to kind of be not looking down necessarily. I'm not sure. Have you seen what a tri-bike looks like?
No, I'm not aware of this type of bike.
So a tri-bike is basically meant for you to be kind of leaning over your handlebars. So you are resting your upper body on your elbows, basically. Kind of make your road bike. You can put what we call aero bars on your road bike so that you can lean over and rest your upper body on these aero bars. But the road bike, its geometry is not designed for you to be kind of hunched over, if you will. And so a lot of people will prefer the TT bike, especially for race courses that are flat. If you're lightweight, like I am, the hill climbs come a little bit easier. But if it's a flat course, for some people, and there's headwinds, people like myself, again, who are lightweight, we tend to not do so well in the headwind because we basically are just getting thrashed on the road, whereas heavier set people, can kind of barrel through, if you will. But they tend not to be so good on the hill climbs because they have more weight to propel upwards, if you will.
So it's interesting that size and weight is it has its advantages and disadvantages. It seems fairly democratically on the course of a triathlon.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's important too because in triathlon there is, with one exception, and I'll get into that later. There is no in triathlon we are categorized by age group, and so it's usually in increments of 5, so like 29 to 34, 35 to 39, and a lot of people will be very excited when they're in a new age group. So when I turn 30, I am the youngest in an age group of 5 years, right? And so a lot of people think that, and well, not even think, you are usually at an advantage because you're the youngest in that age group.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and so that the one exception that I did mention earlier is that some races in the U.S. And USA Triathlon actually do recognize having what they call a Clydesdale and Athena category, which is, I want to say, it's basically a weight class, if you will. So the Clydesdale is men, I want to say over like 220 pounds. And for Athena's, it's for women over 160 or 180 pounds. We don't have that sort of thing anywhere else in the world, I think, but that does exist.
So there are the very rare occasion weight classes, but overall, I guess it's maybe the beauty of things like triathlons and marathons. Just the organizers can simply say, here's age groups, here are genders, and then everyone goes at the same time. But I guess, here's an interesting connection to that because, I ran, like 10Ks, which obviously aren't the same. But what I always found super confusing was I would be racing and I'm not quite sure who my competition is one. And two is, as you mentioned with the age groups, it's hard to tell how old people are, especially runners. So like if there'll be like a few guys in front of me and a few guys behind me, and I just keep thinking, because I'm 33, I keep wondering, well, is this guy in front of me like 28? Because in that case, I don't really care. But if the person in front of me is like 30, 30, then all of a sudden we're in the same age group. So do you guys ever have that struggle where you're like it's towards the end of the race and you're like neck to neck with someone and you're wondering, wait, is this person in the group? do I push myself here, or do I just kind of glide because the person next to me is definitely, in their 50s? And,
absolutely. So it certainly depends by race. In all Ironman, the athlete list, which is basically a roster, the participants, is always released about a week, if not longer, if not like a month before the race. And you know what? I'm not even going to deny it. There is a competitive streak in me, and I will go and Facebook stalk every single name in my age group.
Yeah. So I guess when it's more competitive, you're more knowledgeable. So you know when you're at that end if that person is in your competition.
It's actually kind of embarrassing. I'm sure everybody else does it. But yeah, I definitely use those athlete lists. There are also kind of rankings within the Ironman world. It's called All World Athlete, and there's a gold, silver, and bronze. Gold is like the top 1% of athletes in your age group. Silver is the top 5%, and bronze is your top 10%. And some of the benefits that come with being AWA is that you have a different line to pick up your race packet. You have a different like swim cap that distinguishes you from the other athletes, things like that. But I will always look at who the other AWA athletes are. But I'm definitely not concerned about anyone else in any other age group. I'm only concerned about the ladies in my own age group.
Interesting. So yeah, you do have that advantage that ironically, it's not great that the proportions of the percentage of female athletes are low, but on the flip side, it's easier for you to spot your competition. You're part of, I think the exact title was Ironman Foundation's Women for Tri Ambassador Team. So what do you guys do, and how has the progress been so far in regards to recruiting more girls to be part of Ironman and triathlon and these type of events?
Yeah, it's a work in progress to put it in a nutshell. So it's a program. Women for Tri is a part of Ironman and the Ironman Foundation. It is a nonprofit in the United States, and its mission is to encourage women to participate in a triathlon and to advocate for basically a higher female percentage at races. And this is so important because, like I've been saying repeatedly today, is that the number of women participating in triathlon tends to be astronomically low compared to men. This differs amongst regions. So, for example, in Australia or in North America, it's usually, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's 50-50, but it's, at its peak, it's probably closer like 40% women, 60% men. But in Asia, it's often something like 10 to 15%. I don't think I've really seen anything higher or even close to 30%. It's still something that is terribly important to me, even though it means that there's more women that I had to compete against. I think triathlon is something that could really use a little bit more gender parity. And so Women for Tri was established about 4 years ago, so still pretty new. And we have what we call an ambassador team, so people women who apply to this team for various benefits, but we work together in different regions, in our own regions, to be representatives for women, to be someone that women can reach out to. But we also we have obligations to hold different events. Maybe it's like a triathlon clinic or a workshop that will hopefully kind of open up the inkling or the notion that triathlon is something that any woman can do. And so it's something that I knew existed, but last year I didn't apply for it because I just felt like I didn't have the connections or kind of like the knowledge to really be an active advocate for women in triathlon. But last year, because I took a year off from racing, I was able to kind of more immerse myself in like the training of triathlon and kind of nurturing my connections of triathlon. Because of my work in sports, just getting to know people who are active in the world of triathlon in Japan.
Yeah, it's great that you guys are doing this. As you said, especially where you are currently located, right, in Japan, it's just it's a 10 to 15%, right, in comparison to the North America, where it's like 30% women. So it's good to hear you guys are taking these initiatives, and hopefully things will slowly change. Although it means more competition for you, so more perhaps.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions when it comes to starting triathlon, and not everyone has the team support or a coach to lean on. And I think that's where I really thrive on kind of, and not to say that I know everything, and I'm working on coaching certification right now, so that I can actually dole out advice with some authority. But I think it just helps to be able to have that sort of sounding board, especially coming from a woman. Because also with women, we have kind of different concerns when it comes to training and being active. And so I hope that, by being part of Women for Tri, but also just kind of being active in the triathlon community, people know that, there is support. You don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, it's really good stuff you guys are doing. And I hope the numbers continue to increase. And as we wrap up the podcast, I like to usually ask the guest, what is coming up in the next few years, or, even next few decades. What are their goals? So I just want to sort of give you the mic back again here. And if you could maybe explain to the guests what you have in plan in the next few years, as well as, the next 5-10 years, if you have anything specific in mind.
Gosh, well, the COVID has certainly threw us all in a loop here. And so it's hard to say with a lot of confidence what is in the plans for the future. I think for triathlon, there's certainly an emphasis on diversifying triathlon as a sport. And that's not to say, we've been talking about women, and that's important too. But triathlon certainly struggles with the image that it is not just for a sport for the wealthy, but it's a sport for middle-aged white men. And, I'm just going to be brutally honest. It's right now, that's kind of what it looks like. It's very white and it's very male dominated. There is literally one pro triathlete who is Black, and there are no female Black triathletes. So things like that. In Asia, there are very few triathletes of color as well. And so I think, diversifying triathlon is probably high on the agenda for the next couple of years. And I think that's really exciting too. There's actually a Triathlete magazine. It's literally called Triathlete. And I think it's every 2 months they release an edition. And these past couple of months, they've been highlighting Asia. And so they've highlighted India, China, and the most recent edition highlights Japan. And Triathlete magazine is primarily a North American publication. And I think it's really fascinating that they're, at least taking a look at what triathlon looks like outside of North America. Outside of the Western world. And it's also fascinating too, because I don't know what triathlon looks like in India or in China, but hopefully, little movements like that will kind of expand the world of triathlon and what triathletes look like at races. Not just women, but also, Indians and Chinese athletes. When you have triathlon races that look a little bit more colorful, that would be a great success. And right now, it's all races have more or less stopped. And so it's difficult to say what it looks like for the future at this time, but hopefully that is something that the world of triathlon can look forward to in the next 5-10 years, just diversifying what triathletes look like.
Yeah, and it seems like you guys are making the right steps for it. And I look forward to hearing more about these races. I think you've been doing it for 4 years, it said in your bio. And is this something and you want to basically just do it basically forever, huh?
I think as long as like my body wills it to. I used to be more of what some people might call a runner. And so it was just a lot of, it's just a lot of pounding the pavement. And my ankles just don't really like trail runs. And so for me, triathlon is kind of a happy balance. That being said, triathlon, because of the distances the way it is, in any race, you're spending about 50% of your time on the bike. And so I do spend a lot more time on the bike now, and have the thighs to prove it now. But I think the running, swimming, and the cycling all kind of come together nicely for me to prevent injuries, especially the kinds of injuries that I used to have when I was more of a hardcore runner. And so for me, I think triathlon is kind of a lifestyle, really, that I do hope to and see myself continuing for the next 5-10 years, if not longer. And it's something that I feel passionately about and hope to be involved with even more so than I am now in terms of advocacy and just being able to be someone that can be relied on for good advice and someone that knows their stuff about triathlon.
Awesome. Well, this was a unique experience, right? We went all audio, and hopefully this only audio is paid off, and the quality is going to be good enough that people can understand what we're saying. And thank you for chiming in the morning, Saturday morning today, and good luck with the triathlon stuff. I'll be following from afar, unless you come to Jeju Island, where we do have our own triathlons. And again, hopefully once all this COVID stuff's over, things will go back to normal. So thank you for joining us today. And see you around.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Nick.